This is part 82 of ASP.NET MVC tutorial. In this video, we'll discuss creating custom validation attribute. We'll be working with the example that we started in part 80, so please watch parts 80 and 81 before proceeding with this video. Now, any value outside the range of 112000 and 112010 will throw a validation error message for this higher date property. Now let's say we want to keep this minimum value restriction as it is, but we want to change the maximum value. We want the maximum value to be today's date instead of this hard-coded date. And to achieve that, we'll be tempted to use something like this. So obviously within .NET, to get current date, we can use datetime.now.toShortDateString. Now look at this. When we compile this, we will get a compilation error. So obviously we cannot use datetime.now as the argument for attributes. Let's see how to fix this using a custom validation attribute. First of all, let's add a folder and let's name it common, and let's add a class file to this folder, and let's call it date range attribute. So this is going to be the name of our custom attribute that we are going to create. So the file name is also daterange attribute.cs. So here we have this class daterange attribute. Now first of all, let's get rid of the namespaces that we don't need to keep things simple. Now this class is going to inherit from range attribute class, and this range attribute class is present in system.componentModel.data annotations namespace. So let's go ahead and bring that in. So this class is going to inherit from range attribute class. Now let's include a constructor for our daterange attribute class. And then keep in mind, we want to keep our minimum value restriction as it is. So let's pass that as a parameter to the constructor. And then this constructor of the daterange attribute class is going to invoke the base class constructor. What's the base class for this class? Range attribute. And if we go to the definition on range attribute class, look at this. It has got several overloaded constructors. We're going to invoke this overloaded constructor that takes 3 parameters. So let's flip to our daterange attribute. So to invoke the base class constructor, we use base keyword, and then the moment I open the bracket, notice that it shows us all the constructor versions that are available on our base class, which is range attribute class. So we're going to make use of this overloaded version. To get the type, we use type of keyword. So get the type of datetime, and minimum value, we are going to pass this parameter as the argument for minimum value to the base class. And how are we going to get the maximum value? So obviously we want the maximum value to be today's date, and to get the current date and time, we use datetime.now. And since we are only interested in date part, let's convert that to short date string. And then this constructor is going to have an empty body. Look at that. All we are doing here is we created a constructor, and this constructor is going to invoke the base class constructor. That's it. We are done creating our custom validation attribute. Now all that is left is to use this validation attribute with the higher date property within our employee class. So instead of using the range attribute, let's use daterange attribute, and this daterange attribute is present in MVC demo.common namespace. So let's include that within our employee class. And now let's decorate this higher date property with daterange attribute, and we need to specify the minimum value, and we want to keep that minimum value restriction to 2000. So let's go ahead and pass that. Alright, so let's build our solution. Let's fire up a browser. Let's navigate to the index view, Then let's click edit to navigate to the edit view. And look at that. Today the date is the current date is 21/08/2013. Let's try 22/08/2013, which is day after tomorrow. So we should get a validation error message. Look at that. The field hire date must be between 1/1/2000 and 21/08/2013. So if I change that to 21, which is today's date, it should accept that value and save it to the database as expected. Alright, very good. Now let's look at another example of creating a custom validation attribute. Now let's say our business rules have changed and we don't want any restriction on minimum value. Okay, so we want to accept any value for this hire date property as long as the date is less than or equal to today's date. So to enforce that, let's create another custom validation attribute. Okay, so let's add a class file to this common folder and let's call this current date, and then again let's get rid of the namespaces that we don't need. So now this current date class, actually let's rename that to current date attribute. Okay, so this current date attribute class is going to inherit from validation attribute. Now if you remember, this date range attribute is inheriting from range attribute class, and if you look at this range attribute class, that's inheriting from validation attribute class. So if you want to create a custom validation attribute, then we either directly or indirectly inherit from validation attribute class. Okay, now since I don't want to make use of any of the methods and constructors and properties that are available in range attribute, I'm going to inherit directly from validation attribute class. So this current date attribute class is going to inherit from validation attribute class, but that class is again present in system.componentModel.data annotations namespace. So let's go ahead and bring that in as well. Alright, so let's make this class inherit from validation attribute class. And if we go to the definition on this validation attribute class, this class contains one virtual method called isValid. So this is the method that we are interested in. We need to override this method. Okay, so let's go ahead and do that. So look at this, the moment we type override and once I press space, then it will show me all the methods that can be overridden, and the method that we are interested in is this isValid method. Okay, let's get rid of this call to the base class isValid method, and let's provide the implementation for this isValid function. And look at this, the datetime value that we are going to provide to this attribute is going to come into this function as an object type. Okay, so first of all, let's go ahead and convert that to datetime. So datetime, and let's name the object reference variable as datetime, and we need to convert the value that is coming into this function to datetime, and to do that let's use toDatetime function and then pass the value. Okay, so if the datetime is less than or equal to datetime.now, then we want to return true, because we want the date value to be less than or equal to today's date, in which case we will return true, else we will return false. So instead of having all this lines of code, what we can do is we can achieve all this in a single line. All we want to do is return whatever this expression returns. So this expression is either going to return a true or a false. Okay, so let's return simply the expression result. if it's less than the current date and time, it's going to return true. Otherwise, it's going to return false. So we can get rid of all these lines altogether. Alright, so we are done creating another custom validation attribute. All that is left is to use this attribute with our hire date property in the employee class. Okay, so instead of using date range attribute, I want to use current date attribute. Look at that. And then this attribute doesn't expect any parameters to be passed in, so I'm not going to pass any parameters. So let's build our solution and let's navigate to the edit view. So at this point it should accept any date. There's no restriction on minimum value. As long as it is less than the current date and time, it should accept it. So 21 is today's date. Let's try 22, which is definitely not the current date, so the field hire date is invalid. And then let's try something 21, which is the value that it should accept. Look at that, it saves as expected. On the other hand, if I try 0101 2010, or let's try 2009, we shouldn't have any restriction on the minimum date time value. Look at that, that gets saved as well. On the other hand, if we try something like this and click save, look at that, the value is not valid for hire date. That's it for today. Thank you for listening. Have a great day.